Dads, what are they good for? Absolutely nothing, at least according to certain people, right? You see this as kind of a popular mantra anymore. Like, what do we even really need men for? And again, I get that it's kind of part of this girl boss form of feminism of like having kids without the man or raising kids without the man, because after all, you're a strong woman and can slay and the whole deal. And let's face it, dads are just deadbeats anyways, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing is, anybody that's going to tell me, well, Nick, that's a caricature. Nobody really believes that. Okay, go look at how fathers are predicted or how fathers are portrayed in popular sitcoms, how they're portrayed in cartoons. They're idiots, they're buffoons, they're deadbeats, they're absent, right? Dads just are treated as if they're superfluous at best and a main source of the problem at worst. And let's all acknowledge that there are deadbeat dads. There's horrible dads out there. All right. But there's a lot of other dads that are either doing their best or doing a really good job. And the whole question is that, okay, how important are they? Because we are living at a time with probably the most fatherlessness in modern history, right? I don't think we've experienced this much fatherlessness in society without a major world war, famine, or something else wiping out a significant portion of the male population. In fact, nowadays, fatherlessness is not just a question of deadbeat dads or war or disease or something else. Now it's a matter of policy. And today on this episode, we're going to be asking the question, how important are fathers? Is it true that the nuclear family can essentially be replaced and that fathers just don't play that important a role in society? Or are they even more critical than we previously thought that they were? We're going to be discussing all of that and more on this episode of Making the Argument. As always, I am your host and dad of 3 children. Now I have a 4th child in the form of a son-in-law. In fact, I mentioned this the other day. I pointed over to my son-in-law who's 6'6". I said, yes, this is my new son. I'm adopted. No, because big dude. Anyways, we're going to be talking about all that today. Also with me in the studio, my beautiful bride, Tina, Queen of the Bees.
Yes, and I know what I'm talking about because I had 2 dads, right? Yeah. And I can attest to the fact that it makes all the difference in the world for especially girls. So yeah,
I too had 2 dads at one point, and then one.
And sometimes that's not. I mean, it's not ideal to have 2 dads, but I'm thankful that I had 2 dads because. But
you only got one. You only got one baby daddy. It's me.
I've only got one baby daddy. Did you see the post some gal put up saying, I wish we could choose our baby daddies? I'm like, but you can. But you can.
Oh, wow. Christian, our resident historian and political prognosticator, also 2 dads.
That is correct.
Yeah.
All 3 of us at this table have come from divorced families. In some ways that kind of reveals what you were saying in your intro, right? That like fatherlessness is at a higher level today than at any point in history.
Well, certainly broken families. And I think and unfortunately in too many broken families, fatherlessness actually plays a significant role in that. And others, I was fortunate that even though my mom and dad got divorced when I was very young, my dad still played an active role in my life. I had a stepdad for about 5 years and that didn't work out. And anyway, I ain't crying about it. Right? It's not like he was mean or abusing me or anything like that. But I remember my mom told me, "Hey, we're gonna go live with Grandpa and Grandma for a while," and I was like, "Sweet."
Speaking of your mom, she's actually in the chat, and she said, "When you were growing up, I didn't allow you to watch The Simpsons because the dad was portrayed as an idiot, buffoon, and a liar."
I actually remember her telling me that. Like, there was a lot of people that didn't want their kids watching The Simpsons because they thought it was gonna. But like, my mom specifically mentioned that she did not like the way that the family and specifically the dad was portrayed in that. And this was coming from a woman who was largely raising me, during the school year by herself, right? But anyways, that's kind of what we want to go through today. It might be easy to look at someone like me that, I talk a lot about being a father. I talk a lot about being a husband and the various responsibilities associated with that. A lot of my content focuses on that. And we just did a video. In fact, I did one video on things that daughters need to hear from their fathers, and that got a lot of really good feedback. And then I did another video on things sons need to hear from their fathers, and it also got a lot of good feedback, but it also got a little bit of hate. And I've noticed this, is that when I do content about daughters, say 98 to 99% of the comments are positive. They're all saying, yeah, absolutely. This is what little girls need and the whole deal, the whole deal. And I'm grateful for that. When I do one on men and what sons need to hear, a lot of times I'll get in the comments either that I'm being too mean or, well, daughters need to hear this too. Like, yeah, I know. I did a whole video on what daughters need to hear, but right now I'm talking to sons.
That's so annoying when people do that. They come gosh. They latch onto one thing and they're like, well, you should talk about this too. What about the girls? And it's like, oh my gosh, everything's about girls right now. Could you just stop with all the cope, please?
Can we talk a little bit about what sons need? Because after all, girls, ladies, if you want to find a guy that you want to marry and raise kids with who will be a good father, then we need fathers talking to sons about what that looks like. Right? What that looks like. So sometimes, yes, boys need content specifically directed toward them on how to become good men, especially in a world where half the content seems to be telling them to be women.
Yeah.
And the other half of the content seems to be telling them to be absolute, like, terrors that you would never want your daughter to marry.
And we have a lot of men right now who were fatherless. So they're starting this legacy on their own and they need all the help they can get. So come on, stop with the man bashing. I'm so sick of it. When somebody comes in and does that kind of cope, I sit there and I just go, okay. So you went from like reasonable category to unreasonable category and I don't need to listen to what you say. And in my mind, I just make this line and go, oh, you're over there. But
let's face it, there's been a long process taking place. Now, some of this really is rooted in political ideology. There are political ideologies out there that are actually very adversarial toward what we might call the the traditional family, a husband, a wife, a man, a woman, raising kids together within a family, and that being the primary support structure, educational structure, and authority structure for the upbringing of children, right? For instance, if you're someone that believes with Marx, or you tend to be more socialist, those political ideologies are openly hostile to what we would call the nuclear family. If you see modern feminism has been very openly hostile toward the concepts of marriage, the concepts of what is necessary and good and important for the raising of children. You've also seen this within other ideologies where they talk about like, oh, it doesn't matter if the man and wife are married. It just matters if the children have two parents that love them. And it doesn't matter if they have a husband or father and a mother. If they have two mothers or if they have two fathers, that's fine. It doesn't matter as long as they're getting. They treat this as if there isn't like an order or design to this. And here's the question. Is it true? Because arguably we've all been participating, whether we recognize it or not. As a society, we've all been participating in one of the kind of bizarrest and most unique social experiments in human history. The belief that fathers are not a necessary or important component with respect to the building of families or the raising of children. All right? So that's what we're going to dig in today. We're going to dig in on whether or not that was true. And I think part of the reason why we have seen such problems within the family is a complete lack of red meat. And that's where Good Ranchers comes in, because if that's what your family is missing right now, you just don't have a sufficient amount of red meat or even white meat or seafood. Right? Good Ranchers is here to help you out, right? And a proud sponsor of this show. We love Good Ranchers. If you go to goodranchers.com, you use promo code Nick, you're going to get some deals, because right now, I'm going to read this off. I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to get it wrong because this is good. You go to goodranchers.com, use promo code Nick. The link is in the description. You get $25 off your first box, free express shipping, and a free add-on for a year. That means you sign up for the subscription right now, and for all 12 months, you get to add on either chicken breast, Black Angus ground beef, Applewood smoked bacon, or wild caught salmon. You heard that right. This is not salmon in a farm somewhere. This is wild caught salmon. This salmon was out there living its best life, and then bam, was caught it because it tastes better. Because salmon that got to go out there and live their lives taste better. GoodRanchers.com, promo code Nick, you're going to get all of that. And I'm telling you, if you are looking for the food that doesn't have a bunch of crap injected into it, right, Good Ranchers is the place to go. Tina and I can tell you this right now. This has become so important to us with our kids, with our own diet, especially with certain like sicknesses and stuff like that. It is amazing how much of it is tied to the food that you eat. And if you think going to the grocery store means that you're getting quality beef, poultry, pork, seafood, if you think that's what it means, simply because maybe there's a little American flag on the, I'm telling you right now, that might have all grown up in a feedlot somewhere else. You want something that was actually raised in the sort of conditions, not injected with all the crap that you don't want. GoodRanchers.com, promo code Nick, link in the description, get $25 off the box, and get that free add-on for a year. That's a good deal. All right, let's go ahead and move on to
let me just say, this is how much nobody cares about fathers.
Okay.
Okay, we usually get, we're usually around close to like 1,500 people in the live stream watching. Mm-hmm. Only 259 people are tuned in. They don't care about dads. This is how our society does not care about dads anymore. You guys should feel really sad. And thank you. Thank you, everybody. All of you who have tuned in, thank you so much for caring about dads.
All right. Tina, it's okay. Wow. We're like not even 10 minutes into it.
Yeah.
We always get new people
They don't
pouring
care about
in.
dads.
Let's see what it looks like when we get close to the end of the episode.
Right.
But I will say, we have talked about families, we've talked about fathers, we've talked about mothers, and we've talked about children all on this podcast in separate episodes in the past. And one reoccurring theme that personally I've caught from time to time, depending on the episode, is that the nuclear family as an institution is being dismantled right now. And not even right now. It's been dismantled for, oh gosh, I mean, at this point, you can say like at least 40 years, probably more than 40 years at this point. And when you go far enough back in history, it's kind of unprecedented where we're at. But you know, one of the biggest issues that I've seen brought up, and we were talking about this right before the camera started rolling, is that it's not as if bad fathers just kind of popped into existence in the 20th century, right? They've been with us for all of history. The example that I used, the biggest example that comes to my mind is Ivan the Terrible murdered his own son, right? I mean, and talk about a pretty terrible father, right? But that doesn't mean that in 16th century Russia, people were talking about how we don't need fathers, right? Or that fathers are terrible, fathers are deadbeats. But instead, nowadays, there's so many examples of bad fathers that exist. And so therefore, the message and the narrative is fatherhood itself is the problem. And I think that is kind of a break from history, because it's not as if fathers have been perfect. No human has been perfect, right? But instead, we've looked at these examples of fathers failing their children or failing their spouses, and we've now taken that and run with it and basically said we don't need fatherhood itself.
Well, I think part of this had to do with female empowerment, right? You can't look at people like Gloria Steinem and other leaders within the women's movement and not come to the conclusion that they honestly, it's not as if they wanted to eradicate men entirely, but they wanted to significantly diminish their role and their importance in their roles within society, or treat their roles as if they were not uniquely, there was nothing uniquely masculine about them or any sort of necessity for it. And what this eventually led to over time, we have this first article up here, and if you scroll down to the part where it talks about myths about fatherhood, scroll down a ways. It's about halfway down the page here. You're gonna run into something right there. Despite the established benefits, there are still many people who believe that dads aren't that important. At the very least, they're not as important as moms. This belief is reflected all across society. Additionally, there are some other myths that get in the way of some dads being great dads. 1, men lack instincts for knowing how to care for and communicate with their babies, right, with infants. 2, babies form an earlier, stronger, more beneficial emotional bond with their moms than their dads. 3, compared to moms, dads are naturally less empathetic and less skilled at communicating. 4, the load between fathers and mothers is already equally distributed. And 5, dads aren't as competent as mothers. And again, I think what's interesting about these, again, what this article is suggesting are myths about fatherhood, has to do with somewhat of a common misconception about what sort of roles or attributes or what sort of characteristics factor in at different points of a child's development and to what purpose. Like, I know that when I had my kids, even when I was in the military, I had all my kids when we were in the military, right? That's when we had I was deployed a lot. I was gone a lot, right? But when I was home with my kids, I still tried to make sure, and this is by no means suggesting I did it all right, but tried to make sure that I had that time to connect with them, to hold them, to change diapers, to do the stuff that, it is not always fun, but helps build that bond with your children. But I think sometimes we get this idea that because of the nurturing of small children is considered more of a feminine characteristic or trait. And I think there's truth to this, right? I don't buy this argument that, no, they do it equally. No, they do it differently and for different reasons. And actually, we're going to get into that a little bit later here. But this idea that dads don't play a significant role or don't have a significant role to play in their kids' lives when they're very little is very, very problematic. And I also want to point out, this is not just a feminist thing. I know some dads that kind of take this attitude of, oh, well, when they're really little, that's kind of the mom's domain. And then when they get a little bit older, then the dad comes in and plays a large or plays more of a role. There are elements to that could be, true. You a lot of times you see dads interact with kids a little bit more when, they can walk around or move or have greater motor skills or things like that. Sometimes they're a little bit more timid. You see guys that are afraid to hold, little babies because think they're going to break them, right? But I can't emphasize enough that that's false. Fathers need to have that time and contact with their children when they're very little. They need to be forming those bonds. Not forming those bonds is a choice. And this is the part where, again, we don't let men completely off the hook here. Even though culture is pushing things in a particular direction or maybe minimizing the importance of your role in early childhood development, that doesn't mean you got to put up with that crap. Culture comes up with all kinds of things that you openly reject and fight against. Let this be one of them and form those bonds early on.
I know when babies are young, a lot of men have a really hard time with wanting to hold the baby, not because they don't want to hold the baby. It's more because they're afraid they'll break the baby.
Yeah.
They're afraid they'll do it wrong. And I'm not into this whole feminizing men and being like, oh, lean into your feminine side and your nurturing side and hold this baby and do all this stuff. But I will say this. My husband, Nick, because he was raised with so many siblings, he was so much better at changing diapers than I was. And I had to learn how to do all this stuff because I wasn't raised in a household with younger siblings. And so I do have younger siblings, but as I said before, there was divorce in our family. And so my younger siblings have different moms. And so I was raised in my mother's household with no babies. And so I didn't get the experience or I didn't get good at changing diapers until I was a mom. And Nick was just amazing at it. He would just pick up the baby. He knew all the rules because he had all these sisters, right? He knew all the rules about changing babies and how to do that properly.
How you change diapers for girls is different than how you change diapers for boys.
And so, and there was nothing feminine or whatever about Nick's ability to do that. What it is he saw a job that needed to be done and he did it, and it was fantastic.
Well, and I
know a lot of guys I remember us having this argument around the table a while back about this guy was saying, well, I'm not changing diapers. That's her job and blah, blah, blah. I'm just not doing that. And my thought is, that being unwilling to do that is lame.
Here's what you should hear every time. Here's what you should hear every time a dad says, I'm not willing to change diapers. That's a father that's willing to let his child sit in their own filth.
Yeah.
You're a piece of crap, dude. I'm serious. I get it that your primary job, so for Tina's and my arrangement, we got married. When we talked about getting married, we talked about what our expectations were for each other when we started having kids. And Tina had said, look, when we start having kids, I don't want to have to work outside of the home in order to keep the family afloat, right? I would like us to be in a financial situation. I know it will include sacrifices, but I'd like us to be in a financial situation where I can stay home and be with the children and create a home. And I totally agreed with that. And so that was my financial goal. My financial goal as a husband was how do I make enough money in order to facilitate that to where, and again, not lap of luxury, but we could do it, right? And there was times where it was tough, but we could do it. We could get by. But this idea so all that to say, that did mean that the primary role of taking care of the kids on a day-to-day basis from the moment they woke up and stuff like that that was kind of Tina's primary role, whereas my primary role at that point was to be the breadwinner and to do the other things associated with it. That doesn't mean that I didn't have any role with respect to taking. They're still my kids. I'm not babysitting.
You took a secondary role in that, but you weren't begrudging about it or anything. I mean,
well, can I say what part of this is too? Because some people misunderstand when I say this. They're like, "What? You're just as important as a parent. Like you need to." Yeah, I get that. But anybody that says that the mother and father should spend equal time on doing all the chores with respect to the household of the kids when one person has to work outside the home, that doesn't make any sense.
No, it doesn't. And we have this weird warped mindset that people seem to have gotten lately where, we're going to split all the chores right down the middle, even though he works and she stays home. That doesn't make any sense. And if you talk about this with certain women, they'll say, "Oh, this is toxic." That mindset is toxic. And you know what I think is toxic is women who are just mean to the men. I don't understand that. So, well,
I think it comes down like this. You also see this too, where they talk about, fathers and their role with kids, where they talk about this idea of that, women have to do more unpaid labor. It's like, that doesn't mean it's uncompensated labor. Right? Like if the husband is working outside the house in a way that provides for all the food, all the clothes, all the money, and the wife is obviously utilizing all of that. In our family, you managed the budget. It wasn't me. It was unpaid labor to take care of the kids, to educate the kids in the sense that nobody was giving you a paycheck. But this idea that it was uncompensated or you were just engaging in slave labor is a deliberate misrepresentation of what actually takes place in that sort of environment. Here's the other thing.
I see that as leftist cope. They just want you to stick your kids in daycare and go make a paycheck too, and then split everything down the middle while your kids suffer.
Yeah. Well, and I would say this too. The other reason why it's important to kind of establish this idea of domains, right? What are primary and secondary responsibilities? Was I every bit as responsible for the health, safety, and education of my children? Of course, but I had a different role to play in that process. My role took me outside of the house to earn money in order to provide the things. Tina's role was more direct with respect to various aspects throughout the day. Now, when I would come home, I would again slip more into more of a direct role. Now, Tina didn't come to the door and be like, "Here's the kids, I need a break." She would do it with the process. She knew I was coming home from work and I was transitioning into, being at home now from work. And we would take the time to kind of do that. But
but you also weren't, Nick didn't come home and just demand that he had like decompression time. Yes, we tried to give him the decompression time, but if it was a particularly rough day, he would come straight in and help. There was never this, "Oh, you've got to give me my hour of decompression."
Here's the problem. When people don't establish kind of expectations, you run into this environment where all of a sudden now there's another human life that you're responsible for. And there's different duties and responsibilities and different stress and frustration associated with it. And the question becomes what are our roles? So Tina running the household means she's got to run the household. And so if I'm coming in and I'm saying, "Well, I want to do it this way, I want to do it this way, or why is this over here?" What I'm doing is I'm now coming into her domain and I'm trying to run it.
Yeah, that's not okay either. And I do know there's some men that are like that, where everything's got to be perfect. Did you ever see, I'm sure people know, there was a film a long time ago, I think Julia Roberts was in it, Sleeping with the Enemy. Yeah. And the guy would come in and he like adjust all the towels and, tisk tisk that everything wasn't perfect and the whole deal.
Well, here's the point I want to get through with this, okay? Because I'm not talking about the stereotypical sleeping with the enemy, domineering husband. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about each person within the relationship having domains and responsibilities for which they are primary in charge of. And so what it is that it's not that you don't help. It's not that you don't have secondary responsibilities. It's the fact that each person gets to have a domain that they know they are responsible for, and that they also get the leverage to manage those responsibilities the way they want without having to run everything by committee. Yeah, right? Like as I'm working outside of the house, it would be absurd for Tina to be calling me up and be like, "You should be doing it this way, or why aren't you doing this project this way, or why aren't you working on this program this way?" That wouldn't make any sense. If I then come home in the domain where Tina is running things with respect to managing kind of the kitchen and the way the house is decorated. And I'm constantly saying, well, I don't like that over there, and I want this done this way, and why aren't we doing this, and why can't the menu be? Again, it doesn't mean I have no say. It doesn't mean I don't have any role. Just like if I wanted to do a job that took me away from home 6 months out of the year, Tina would need to be a part of that decision-making process to figure out what the overall impact on our family is. But by respecting the other's leadership in a particular role, you have a common goal, you have a common mission. That's the family, that's the marriage, right? But then you have different roles and responsibilities for which you respect the other one for taking control of that particular area so you can take control of other areas. And then it's not, it's not competitive, it's collaborative. It's cooperative. You're able to cover down and accomplish so much more because you're not sitting there trying to micromanage each other or divvy up every little task to be like, oh, is it all equal? Did we get everything where it needs to be?
Yeah.
No, you're going forward on agreed upon terms in order to maximize the effectiveness of your marriage and your family.
I have a question, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but everything that you two were just talking about over the last 5 minutes or so, I feel like those are discussions and debates that have kind of always been with us. I mean, and I don't just mean over the last couple of years. I mean centuries, maybe even a millennia. And yet something feels very different about the time that we're currently living in compared to any other point in the past, even the recent past. And so what about these type of topics do you think have led to I don't know how you describe it, a vibe shift or just a change in circumstances? And again, I don't just mean within fatherhood itself, because I know that we are going to have a point in this episode where we're going to talk about specifically why there even is a crisis in fatherhood. Mm-hmm. But rather what I mean is all of these issues, these flare-ups, these debates, these questions, and these discussions have existed as long as families have existed, as long as households have existed. And yet it's really only been in probably the last 2 generations or so, and arguably just the last generation, that these issues have become, in some cases, existential issues that actually lead to divorce. This was not the case a century ago, let alone anything beyond that.
And let's illustrate this point, right? So across America, this comes from a report from AFPI. It says across America, 2022 data indicates that there are approximately 18.3 million children who live without a father in the home, comprising about 1 in 4 children in the United States, so about 25%. Now, understand demographically, that number shifts significantly. It's not on this one.
Okay.
About 80% of single parent homes are led by single mothers, right? So again, when you hear about a single parent home, it's almost always a single mom. Children from single parent families are twice as likely to suffer from mental health and behavioral problems as those living with married parents. In one study, 70% of youth in state-operated facilities were from single parent homes. Children with an actively engaged father perform much better in school. Some data shows that they are 33% less likely to repeat a class and 43% more likely to get A's in school. In a study of 56 school shootings, only 10 of the shooters, 18%, were raised in a stable home with both biological parents. 82% grew up in either an unstable family environment or grew up without both biological parents together. There's studies after studies after studies of the effect of this. Now, to your point, why is this just now becoming an issue? It isn't, right? You had Patrick Moynihan, a Democrat senator from New York, who was actually very, very well respected. He actually talked about this being a crisis back when the fatherless rate within the Black community was 33%.
How long ago was that?
I want to say this was, 50s, 60s. So 33%, I think it was in the 1960s. The Moynihan report comes out and it talks about this. You also had some other reports that were coming out at the same time. They were almost immediately decried as being racist or picking on a particular demographic. Charles Murray, you got in trouble with this when he was talking about it. He ended up writing another book called Losing Ground, where he said, fine, if you don't like talking about all the demographics involved, I'll just talk about white people. And in his book, Losing Ground, he just talked about fatherlessness and the loss of stable families within the white community, because the white community is now up, I think, close to around the 30 percentile mark. Black families are now over 50%. Hispanic families are close to 50%. The only one that I think is still hovering right around maybe 10 or 12% is Asian families. And again, these are broad categories. the thing that he was talking about was that at that time, obviously you had a lot of, you had positive things going on in the 60s, like the civil rights movement and trying to overturn things like Jim Crow. But that ended up having a lot of discussions about, within the black community, it was about the concept of the legacy of slavery. Within other communities, it was talking about the concept of, feminism was on the rise. That was much more predominant at that time, exclusively within kind of white women primarily. And the idea is, okay, do we really need men? Are men a big part of the problem? Now, keep in mind, at the same time that you had very good questions going on about what sort of role should women get to play within society. You had legitimate questions about that, like good questions. And then you had really, really good questions about this whole idea of making sure that every citizen in the United States was an equal member of society, regardless of their skin color, which again, an incredibly positive development. At the same time, you also had a massive influx of Marxist ideology within academia. You had a massive influx of, we'll call it leftist ideology. That as soon as you call it Marxist, people automatically think, Red Scare, communists are coming. Let's just call it leftist ideology. But a lot of that leftist ideology was rooted in modern feminism, critical theory, oppressor versus oppressed, stuff that was going on within the Frankfurt School, stuff that was going on within the existentialist movement within France, the postmodernist movement that was starting to take shape in the 60s and 70s. All of these things were taking place at the same time that these questions were taking place. And the other major thing that had developed that was unique in American society was the massive expansion of the federal government, and the federal government taking on more and more roles with respect to providing for people, providing for families. So the progressive era wanted the government to play a more dominant role within the education of children, the raising of children. They wanted to make the government to play a far more dominant role with respect to the provision of economic benefits for children. This is where you see the Great Society under Lyndon Johnson. What I've also learned is that when you start to critique the 1960s, if you're not careful on how you critique it, a lot of people think, why are you critiquing the civil rights movement? Or that's what your real problem. Your real problem is not what Lyndon Johnson did with respect to the Great Society and the massive expansion of welfare. Your real problem is what he did with the Voting Rights Act. It's like, no, that's not my problem. I fully support, fully endorse this idea that nobody should be, looked down or oppressed in society based off of their skin color or their sex, right? I think that's an antithetical, value, if you want to call it that, within a society that values human life and believes in individual liberty and freedom and equality before the law. But we can't ignore the fact that within the same time that a lot of those positive things were happening, people were starting to completely question the society that they felt had led to these negative things happening. And leftist ideology, and especially Marxist doctrine, postmodernist doctrine, critical theory doctrine, was looking at all of these things that were happening, going, yes, you want to know what caused all this? Capitalism and the patriarchy and the nuclear family. That's what's led to exploitation. And if you really want to get a genuine human flourishing, you've got to challenge everything that you've ever known about the nuclear family, about classical liberalism, about, again, strong fathers. That was going on at the same time. And again, there's no better way to get somebody to question elemental foundations of society than to point out to legitimate grievances and then draw a direct line back from those legitimate grievances to these things over here.
Here's a follow-up question, though.
Now, real quick, let me just say right off the bat, I think that was a complete misalignment.
Well, obviously.
They were pointing to the wrong things as the source of the problem, but you can start to understand why people would say, well, yeah, if we do live in a society that features this, this, and this, and these have been these have been results, then is it unreasonable for me to draw the results back to these conclusions? And yeah.
I do not think that it's really up for debate. I mean, some people might want to, but people are welcome to be delusional all they want. I don't really think it's entirely up for debate that as the organic bonds that form society have been dissolved, the state has attempted to replace those things. Or a better way to describe it would actually be the state has actually helped facilitate the dissolution of those organic bonds in the act of trying to replace them.
Yes.
I mean, the analogy that you used, not even analogy, the example that you used was the welfare state in some cases replacing the family unit.
Oh, not only replacing the family unit, but actually offering positive incentive for women to have children out of wedlock. So you ran into this situation.
We've created a perverse incentive where we are literally subsidizing broken families at this point, or subsidizing the creation of broken families. But the follow-up question that I was going to have is, Marxism is quite old if you think about it, right? Like, Marx is writing in the middle of the 19th century, not even the 20th century.
Yeah.
And yet the cultural Marxist elements of this that you were bringing up that really start shining through in the 1960s, that are questioning the very existence of the family as a viable unit that's worth preserving, that's popping up a century after Marx is writing some of his stuff. So the follow-up question that I have is, why did you not see these relentless attacks against the family in like the 1880s or 1890s, or in the late 19th century or early 20th century?
I think for two reasons. I think this is one of the things that Antonio Gramsci points out, the Italian socialist, right? As he talks about that the problem is that the areas where communism did the best wasn't in late stage capitalist countries like Marx had predicted. It was actually in what you would call more feudal or peasant class societies, where you had an aristocracy, a somewhat abusive aristocracy, and then you had widespread poverty, to include a lot of people that were somewhat tied to, the nobility or the land or whatnot, and unable to improve their situation, right? That's where it actually grabbed root. And when Lenin was going in, again, it's not that they didn't actually attack the idea of the family. They did. The problem is that there's practical considerations to doing that, and it's incredibly difficult, especially when you're talking about centuries old traditions. Not to mention that you can talk about it all day long, but how do you actually replace it? Because that family is providing security, it's providing food, clothing, and stuff like that. If you're going to eliminate it, you got to replace it with something. How do you do that without massive institutionalization, right? The Nazis tried to do this as well when they actually tried to do selective breeding programs. Well, that creates some real problems when you try to replace the family with the state, because it turns out the state, no matter how nice your bureaucrat is, never seems to be quite as interested as the average mother or father in their own offspring.
This is part of the reason why a lot of people will advocate for the state covering paternity leave, maternity leave. They talk about, it's so unfair that men get hosed in our society with the legal system, and the women are always favored. And what they do is they'll highlight, well, that's why we need paternity leave for the dads and this and that. And it's like, they're missing the point.
Yeah.
The point is that the kids need both parents. They just do. And it's never as desirable to have to do it alone, whether you're a man or a woman. Having to do it by yourself is not, you're not as complete. You don't have the ability to do it, as well as you would if you had two partners totally committed to their roles. I'm not trying to call anybody out for circumstances that were beyond their control, where somebody did not want to provide or do that. I came from a situation like that in my family where my dad was not, we'll just say he struggled with alcohol abuse, and it caused him to abuse in other areas. And that's what wrecked the marriage. That's what caused us to not have my dad. And it took him a really long time to clean that up. And he did eventually clean it up, but it took a long time. And thank God I had my stepdad who stepped in, and he was a father to me that my real dad just could not be at the time. He was struggling with alcoholism. And so, I'm not trying to say that you should stay in a situation where you're being abused or situations like that. But in an environment where you have two parents who are both committed to each other and committed to the child, that is the best environment you can have. And to try to caveat and go, oh, well, you're bashing people that are single parents or what? It's like, no. I'm not trying to bash you, but the statistics say what they say.
Yeah.
And they say it because that's what That's what it is. And what's interesting is there are new statistics out talking about single parent households. And if you separate them and you go single father households versus single mother households, the children do much better from a single father household. Like, it's not even close.
Well, and part of that too has to do with crime statistics, which we're going to get into. I want to get to a couple super chats here. Brian Phipps, thank you for the super chat. He said, howdy, my dad passed a few years back. Nick, thank you for your words. I appreciate the fatherly advice. Call your pops tomorrow, can be too late. No, I appreciate that, Brian. I'm sorry for your loss. And, yeah, I do. I do need to call my dad again. And then Chaz Manksel, I think I got that right, said, do you think the rise of mental health issues, especially by women, are directly correlated with the fatherlessness in society today? Yes, I do think so. We showed a chart a while back. I think there's several factors, right? I don't want to chalk everything up to one thing. But we showed a chart a while back where it actually showed that it broke down, I think it was white women, but it broke down white women who identified as conservative, moderate, and
liberal.
Broken
down by age as well.
And broken down by age. I think 18 to 29 was the youngest age category that they considered. And 18 to 29, what they found out was that about 19% of self-described conservative women had been diagnosed at some point with some sort of mental health related issue. With moderate women, I think it was like 21, 22. And with self-described liberal women, it was over 50%. Which is, it's just strange in a way, because you would think, like, the question that got posed was, are we less feminist today than we were, say, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, were all women just rolling around with like massive underreported mental health issues? Or has something new been happening over the last several decades that has not only resulted in this uptick in women specifically experiencing mental health issues, but specifically women who identify with the category of society which has invested so much time and effort into feminist ideology? I mean, you would think at some point, like, okay, if you're a feminist, aren't you kind of riding high right now?
I was about to say,
like,
you won.
Aren't you kind of like? I mean, it is.
What is there to be upset or mentally ill about? You control everything in society.
I don't want to go that far. I want to go far enough to essentially say that it's the same thing when we talk about like racism, and you will have people going, "Now, racism is the worst it's ever been." Really? Like, 70 years ago, right? You were literally prevented by law from taking an equal place within society, right? 170 years ago, you could literally be enslaved. You're trying to say, and I think part of what that stems from is the larger issue is the idea that when you focused exclusively on this oppressor-oppressed dynamic, you have to fall into one of those categories. If you're not going to be an oppressor, right, because those are the bad guys, then you have to be oppressed in some way, which means you've got to constantly focus on those systems of oppression. And even when your side's in power, even when they're in charge, no. The revolution must continue. The revolution is never over. You never actually get to arrive to a point where you can say, we did it, because it absolutely requires some other fight. Now, how does that factor into fatherlessness? Well, again, I will tell you one of the most heartbreaking things is whenever I do videos where I specifically talk about being a girl dad, it's the number of women that are on there going, I wish my dad would have done this. I wish my dad would have said this. I wish my dad would have been there. I wish. And it is like heartbreaking stuff. Half the time when the dad's not there, and the other times when the father is abusive, whether that be, mentally or physically. This is one thing I want to emphasize about this, is because when we talk about this, we talk a lot about the importance of fatherhood. And what I want the men watching this to understand is that what that importance means is that you are important to your children. You will have an impact on your children, whether you show up or not. Mm-hmm. You don't get to decide. Culture doesn't ultimately get to decide whether or not you will have an impact. That's going to happen. That's been established. The moment you had children, they're going to want to know who their dad is.
Yeah. They're
going to want you to be a part of their life. The only thing you get to decide is what sort of impact you're going to have. What sort of how are you going to speak into their lives? How are you going to be there? And look, everybody gets things wrong. One of the things I've noticed is that it is absolutely incredible. I was saying this to somebody last week, and I was at an event. I said, one of the sure signs of God's grace for me is how how for even just minimal effort and showing up and trying to do your best, what an incredible impact that can have on your kids.
And when you don't, it makes a really big impact. I will say from a woman's perspective, raised in pretty tumultuous young years, okay? It's amazing. I'm looking at some of these chats here, and they're talking about why is the statistics so much better for men versus for women, single dads versus single moms. I will say one of the biggest reasons I think that is that the court system favors the mother always, even if she's really not the better choice. And also, there's a lot of women out there who there are just so many more single moms and so many women who, they may not even know who the dad is. And they're partnering up in ways they shouldn't be partnering up. And so you have a lot worse lifestyle happening on that side because a lot of guys don't fight for their kids. Yeah. And if those guys, in some of those situations, it might have been such a bad guy that he would have been a worse choice. The problem is that in our court system, women are almost always favored. And so if a guy has gone through all of the work of trying to get the kids, it means he's a different type of guy. And so you're going to have it's like they're funneling through this gauntlet to prove they're such a good guy to try to get their kids. Yeah. That's why they're getting better results, is because the court only gives the kids to the best men. Yeah. Usually. Either that or the mom is just such a wreck that it's easy to prove that he's the better one for them to go with. And so I don't think you can go, oh, guys are just naturally better than women. I think you would have to account for a lot more variables in order to really try to get that result.
I think one of the things that needs to be understood about the difference in the roles that are played and the reason why they talk about it's this, when you categorize the statistic as children in single parent homes do better if the father is the single parent, I think you have to look at one of the things that you just mentioned is this idea that, okay, well, that's probably a very engaged dad, right? That's probably a very engaged father. The other thing is that some of those statistics are uniquely focused toward crime. Because that is one of the things that is very evident, is that a father being in the household, since most people that commit crimes, especially violent crimes, are young men, have a tendency toward aggression, competition, and they're more apt to engage in violence because of physical prowess than women. And so, yes, if you look at prison statistics, you're far more likely to lower your prison statistics with a single father than you would be a single mother. Mm-hmm. I don't think that suggests anything bad about moms or inferior about moms. It's just more about a practical reality about what young men need in their lives in order to take those traits. Because guess what? There's nothing wrong with competitiveness, aggression, or a propensity toward violence. There are times when you need men to engage in acts of violence, right? So that's not in and of itself a bad thing. The question is how is it channeled within a positive direction? And older men, fathers, grandfathers, people like that, they're the ones that are supposed to come alongside and help younger men channel those masculine attributes in a positive direction and in service to something noble. And when they're gone, it's incredibly hard for women to be able to play that role.
It's proven even if you dig into the crime statistics just a little bit more and you just isolate serial killers, serial killers almost always have mommy issues, right?
And lack a father figure in many cases.
So 72% of serial killers have no father in the home. That's 72%. That is a massive difference you can make in your child's life, and some of this is maybe they had a really psychotic mom, a super emasculating, mom. But I don't know. The numbers, dads are extremely important. When you look at that serial killer number, you get a lot of these feminists that are like, well, why are you blaming the moms? It's not the mom's fault. And it's like, well, okay, if she's the only one he's been around, bad moms create serial killers. Bad moms create criminals.
Well,
And a lack of fathers also contributes to that. But I don't want to pin it 100% on the man or the woman.
No.
It just shows you how important both are.
Well, and the important part to understand with all this is that it's the idea that you have the impact whether you show up or not. Here's the other thing too. When feminists get upset about like, well, you can't blame the women for that. It's like, look, are you strong, independent, bold, and don't need no man? Okay, well then if you're out there being strong, independent, bold, and don't need no man, and you live your life according to that philosophy, right? And then your kids turn out as crap.
Yeah, then where are your stats?
You don't get to. Well, no, you don't get to come back later and say, well, that's men's fault. You said you didn't need us.
Yep.
If you don't need us and you live your life believing you don't need us, and then bad things happen, chances are you don't get to blame us. You don't get to say, I hate most of all this idea of I'm bold, strong, independent. I don't need nothing. You can't tell me what to do. Slay, queen. And then when you live your life that way and it doesn't work out, it's like, well, this is all men's fault. Like, wait, you're the victim now? Maybe you're the victim of your own ideology. Maybe it's not some guy's fault. All right, let's go into this because we want to ask the question of, okay, so we're establishing that fathers are important. What are the differences though? Like, what are the specific roles that fathers play which provide that uniqueness, right? And again, we largely understand the unique roles that women play with respect to the development of children, especially young children. Like, we get it. We kind of intuitively understand it. Everybody, wants to be, with mommy when they're little and stuff like that. So what is the role that men play? And I thought this was a really interesting clip. So let's go ahead and play this real quick.
Uh-oh. That's not coming correctly.
Audio's not coming through. All right, we're going to try to fix that. Let me go in and give you kind of the rundown of what this particular clip was. We'll see if we can get the audio on. What she's basically saying is that the idea that fathers don't form the same sort of close, intimate attachments with their young children is actually false, or at the very least inappropriate. It's not the way that we should think about it. And what she found, because she specifically is...
I've got it fixed.
Oh, you got it? Okay, then we'll go and let her talk about it. Go ahead.
Father does not have an attachment to his child. A fundamental, intense, profound relationship with his child is very difficult to swallow. And we now know that obviously this is not true. But the attachment relationships a child builds with its mother and father are different. They are just as intense and just as profound and just as influential, but they are different. So when we look at a mum's attachment relationship, it is very much based on nurture. And it's quite an exclusive relationship. So it's very much between the two, between the mother and child, and they're very much turned in on each other. So it's an inward-looking relationship. Okay? And it's all about that security, that nurturing security. When we look at dads, dad is also based on nurture. So there's very much a nurturing element there, but there is an additional element. And this is really critical to the dad's role, because as well as nurture, there is an element of what we call challenge. So rather than it being an exclusive relationship, inward-looking, what we see with fathers is they go, I love you, I nurture you, I am your secure foundation. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn you around, I'm going to go, there's the world, and you need to learn how to deal with it.
So
yeah,
that is so true. To give you an example, and my father and I have many debates, as you know. We do not agree politically on anything. I am living proof that not every generation is to the left of their parents. I think my father actually would be horrified at my politics, but I will say there are things that we share in common, and there are things that I am proud of him for, and he is proud of me for. And I have to say, getting my master's was actually his initiative. I remember calling him one day. This was after your first failed run for Congress.
Oh, thanks, Christian.
So I was sitting there like...
I love the way you describe that. You failed multiple times, Nick. I'm talking about the first failure.
After you let me down the first time, Nick. After you disappointed me the first time, I was sitting outside, and I gave my dad a phone call. And this was like 2018 or late 2018. No, this was 2019, because this was after the 2018 Senate run. And I was just kind of aimless in society. I didn't really know what I was doing. I thought I had a plan, and we failed. And I called him. I'm like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I just don't want to do electoral politics anymore. I want to do something else. And he was like, well, then you should do what you had told me when you were 5 and go out there and get the degrees and teach history. And I was like, I just, it's too many things to do, too many hurdles. I don't want to do it. I eventually tried. I applied to a bunch of schools and I couldn't get into a single one, despite the fact that I had pretty good grades when I was getting my bachelor's and I could write very well, but I just couldn't get through it. Well, he's a college professor. Other than that, I think he's a decent person, but he knew how the process worked and he helped me with the application process, and he didn't give up even when I already did, because he wanted me to get the degree. He wanted me to get the degree more than I did, because I was thinking to myself like, oh, this is worthless. In some respects, I still do, right? But it's more of an internal challenge type of thing. It's like scaling a mountain. Well, what does that achieve in the world? You achieve nothing by scaling Everest in terms of impacting the world, but it's overcoming something for yourself. Is where the victory comes from.
Taking on a challenge. Yeah.
Yes. And so he didn't give up on me even when I had already given up on myself. And he just fought and fought and fought to get me to eventually a point where I could walk down a stage in the UK and get a master's degree and be handed it. And I never told him this. I need to tell him this at some point because he never got to see the final draft. But like the final draft of my master's dissertation, which was very long, it took me the whole summer of last year to write, I dedicated it to him. And I even said, to my father who never gave up on me, even when I gave up on myself.
Wow.
And
you do need to tell him that.
I do need to tell him that, because
now that you've just told everybody,
we disagree on so many things, but like we have a shared interest in history, and we have a shared interest in academia in a broad sense, right? Obviously, we've talked at length about the problems within academia, but academia as a discipline, not as an institution, we have a lot in common there. And what she said there is so true, and I feel it on a personal level. And this is such an important point, because right now, I think, as crazy as it sounds, we're at a point right now where we are searching for answers to questions that I feel like we used to know.
Yeah.
And it's almost like we have to relearn some of these things that, quite frankly, generations before us just knew. They didn't have to learn them. They just knew them to be basic eternal truths. And we're sitting here having to like sparse through statistics and studies and TED Talks in order to learn things that every human being until probably like 60 years ago just knew were facts. And again, it's crazy, but the fact of the matter is we do have to relearn these things. And if we don't relearn these things, we're never going to get back to a point where we can address some of the problems that we were talking about for the first like 30 minutes of this podcast.
No, I think it's an excellent point. The idea, when Reagan gave that speech about freedom isn't transferred in the bloodstream, it has to be taught and preserved and passed on for others to do the same.
It's not just freedom.
It's not just freedom, right? It's not just that. It's a whole series of values and experiences and an understanding of history and past and why you got to the place that you are. And a big part of it is properly diagnosing when a good foundation. It's noticing when you've gone off the path. Right. And not automatically associate it with, we went off the path with respect to civil rights in America. And so the real problem is capitalism and fatherhood, right? Like, no, that's not the actual problem. That's not the root cause of what has actually taken place here. That's not the root cause of the problem. Because when you misdiagnose the problem, you end up with really, really bad cures, quote unquote, right? You end up with diagnoses, you end up with prescriptions that don't actually solve the problem, and in many cases exacerbate and make it even worse. And so that's a big part of what we're trying to talk about here. And what I think is interesting about this clip is that role that fathers play. Let's talk about the stereotypical joke here that kind of illustrates this point to some degree. When all my kids were little and they got hurt, right? That they were running around, they skinned their knees, they dropped, something upset them. They almost intuitively wanted mommy, right? Mommy was guaranteed location of safety, love, comfort. If mommy kisses the boo-boo, somehow it's magically healed and everything's okay. All right. Daddy is usually who they came to when they wanted to do something rough and tumble, right? Something challenging. I used to have this thing where I used to throw my kids on the bed like that. And
he was supposed to be putting Lily down, and he would pick her up and twirl her and throw her. She had a big we had I think a double bed in there for her at like 4 years old or 3 years old. And he would spin her and she would land and she'd jump back up like it was a trampoline and he'd throw her again. And
it was rough and tumble stuff. It was chasing him through the house. It was what it was. Part of it was challenging, right? Part of it was a little bit more danger involved with respect to it.
Kids will play with dad, and they don't necessarily play with mom. And it's funny because our girls would even want Nick to play like dollies with him or with her. And it was so funny to watch him with the doll like, hi, how are you? With like the girl voice. It's super funny watching Nick do that. But he was so good about it. And he was always willing. Like there was times when they wanted to do a tea party and he would go in and he would sit with the girls and do it, you know? And so dads were really big on play. Moms were big on nurture.
Well, and part of that comes too from that whole idea of security and challenge, because kids need both. Yeah. Right. They need this idea of there's a secure, safe place, because if you think about what raising kids is, in many cases, it's training, it's sparring. Right. It's you are testing certain boundaries and your capabilities and limitations, and you're doing it in a safe environment. One of the ways I've used to describe this before on raising kids is like, I try to protect my kids from scars, not bruises. And what I mean by that is they got to go out and run and play. They got to climb the tree. They got to fall down sometimes. I'm trying to navigate them through this stage of age-appropriate experiences to where something doesn't happen that's traumatic to them, but they learn that the world can be dangerous and that they should expect that there will be times where they are hurt, there's times where they fail, and the response to that is to get up and persevere smarter than you were when you engaged the first time. Yeah. And this part of that part of that education is so critical to children as they're developing, and both mom and dad play important roles within that dynamic.
They do, and I think it's both boys and girls get they get a little something different from each, but the same standards, standards, but each of us give each of them a little something different. I know that with the girls, they would tell me all their problems in order to get camaraderie, but they would tell daddy all their problems in order to get advice a lot of times, which was really great. And then with our boy, it was, mommy's here to be, the soft place to land. And you can tell me about your heart and what's going on and what's wrong. And when Luke was little, he would cry. And it was so sad when Luke cried because he was the happiest baby in the world. Yeah. He always had a smile on his face. He was just always smiling and drooling. And it was so cute.
It was just yesterday.
But when he cried, it would break your heart. It would just break your heart when he cried, but it didn't break daddy's heart. And daddy, like Nick, there were times when he would have to tell him, okay, you can't cry over this because, and now I'm not saying he was never allowed to cry. Yeah. But there are some things that are worth crying over and some things that are not. And we need to control it and move forward, right? You can't just sit there in the sad. And so Nick used to joke that, just, okay, take those tears, suck them back in. It's going to be a long war, buddy. And
this is what I was told in the military. I'd be like, this is the part where people will watch this and be like, what a horrible dad. I was on combat deployment.
But Nick was really good he was like, okay, now you feel these ways, suck in the sadness, now direct it. And it was like, and it was interesting to see the little switch flip on Luke. I think he was maybe 6 or 7.
There was one time, this was kind of funny. There was one time, because again, dads play rough and tumble with their boys, right? And a little bit too with our girls, but it's a little bit different with the boys. But we were watching this show called Real Steel, which has Hugh Jackman in it, and he's kind of a tortured hero sort of character, a little bit irresponsible, but he had been a fighter. Well, now robots are doing all the fighting, right? Robots are doing all the fighting. He has this robot. So you're basically watching Rocky, but with robots. And we're all sitting there watching this. And I look over at Tina and I said, hey, babe, do you know what the agoge is? She goes, what's the agoge? I said, the agoge is where the Spartans sent their children when they turned age 7 in order to learn how to be warriors. Watch this. And I looked over at Luke, and Luke and I start doing a little boxing, and I clock him just not hard, but like enough to kind of like surprise him. And he goes, and he charges and tackles me. And Tina looks over and she goes, "What just happened to my little boy?" I said, "Oh, no, he's not yours anymore. He belongs to me now." But it was this funny thing because like Luke loves his mom, right? Luke loves his mama. But it is Luke and I. You look at the dynamic that we have. We constantly tease each other, but we challenge one another. We make jokes with one another.
His relationship with me is very different than his relationship with you, and I think they play complementary roles.
Yes,
because you can tell a mom, "Oh, you got to toughen up your son." It's not really your role to do so, unless you're a single mom. Then you got to figure out how to do it. But really, it's dad's job to toughen the kid up. It's your job to be soft for him.
Yeah.
And mom should always be a warm, soft place to land. You know, like her arms should be always open when he needs that. Now, it's interesting as they get into their teen years how much more stoic he becomes. But I know he's feeling things. I know he's feeling things deeply, but he's becoming very stoic. He doesn't. I don't want to tell you, my problems. You've got your own problems. That kind of thing. And I'm like, wow.
He still will though. Like he's not closed.
He'll open
off.
up if
He's not closed off. He'll talk. It's just he's not going to be ruled by them, right? But here's the interesting part. Now think about this for a second. So Tina and I just spent the last 5 to 10 minutes talking about this dynamic, this role between the challenging and the nurturing, and how they complement one another. Okay, now here's what I want you to do. Take out all the challenging part. Take out all the challenging part now, and put an overemphasis on nurturing.
And safety and protection.
And bad things shouldn't happen. And how do we prevent against harm? And now all of a sudden, what do you have? You have both men and women who don't know how to deal with adversity very well, don't know how to apply stoicism when it's important, right? They don't know how to deal with adversity. And when they see adversity, it's injustice. Right? Any sort of challenge that happens to them, any sort of bad thing that happens to them. It's not that life's unfair. It's not that crap happens. It's not that sometimes you just got to pick yourself up and keep charging through. No. An injustice has taken place for which somebody needs to do something about this.
And most likely somebody needs to pay for the injustice, as if nature herself can be punished for being nature. It's the whole point that...
Damn you, hurricane.
We need to pass the Hurricane Control Act of 2024. No, you're absolutely right. Like, what we have right now is an overemphasis on protection. It's the helicopter parent, right? It's the bubble wrapping of society, of nature itself, as if nature is going to care about your feelings or your overly protective, focus. Like, no, the job of the parent, and especially of the father, and this is the most important point of this entire segment, at least in my opinion, from my own perspective, is that the job of the father is to equip his child, and especially his sons, with an understanding that, look, the world is filled with suffering. The world is filled with misery. You can't legislate those things away because it's intrinsic to reality itself. We live in a fallen world. The question is, how are you going to overcome that, rather than how are you going to run away from it? You can't run away from it. And when you attempt to run away from it, you actually diminish yourself as a man, and you fail to fulfill your duties and your responsibilities. And you're going to make yourself worse, and you're going to make your family worse, and you're going to make your community and society worse. And instead, we're living in an era right now where, again, we're trying to bubble wrap reality. It's the helicopter parent. It's the bad things are not allowed to happen. It's the whole, your children aren't allowed to go out there and play, I don't mean play in the streets and get hit by a car, right? I mean, like, go out there and face adversity. Obviously, be the cushion that they can fall back on. But the childhood that I grew up with is radically different than the childhood that my mother and my father grew up with in the 70s and 80s, where you were allowed to go out there and play. You were allowed to go out there unsupervised.
I would disappear. I would, because we lived at my grandparents' house for a while, right? I would disappear for hours, right? I'd be running around playing at the creek. And it was like, Nick knows how to swim and he knows where home is, right? Like I'd just be running around, and like, that was just a thing. There are consequences when you try to create a society that is so adverse toward any sort of harm that it treats it like injustice, as opposed to the natural order of things. Thomas Sowell talks about this from an economic stance, where he said, when people ask questions like, why is there so much, poverty in the world? He goes, poverty is the starting point. He goes, the poverty is the natural condition. You should be asking, why is there wealth? Why is there success? Nature's not trying necessarily to help you out along the way. We got some super chats here I want to get to. Joseph Groshek, thank you very much. Says, funny story, my Marine brother has a boy who's 13, and he finally challenged my brother because he was mad about something, and he got a glimpse that there is always a beggar bear. God bless fathers. Yeah, there's this verse in scripture that says, fathers, don't exasperate your children, right? Because that can be a problem when fathers if they become domineering. But fathers also need to be a check on unfettered emotion, aggression, and things like that. And it can be an important thing for a son to, son decides, well, I'm going to challenge, or I'm going to run away, or I'm going to fight you, or whatnot. Needs to learn, like, oh, okay. I mean, and again, your role as a father at that point is you're not trying to hurt your kid, but you are trying to remind them that, there's consequences to actions. I got another one here I want to go through. For some reason, my mouse isn't working. Thank you very much to Teresa Brooks as well. And then we got another one here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Teresa.
Yeah, very much appreciated. Ace of Spades said, I may not have known my father or had a good stepfather for me, no longer my stepfather, but I had my grandfather to look to me and my mother, who helped me become a better person. I'm also glad for this podcast community that's helped me further. Thank you very much. And I got to say, again, I have a great relationship with my dad, but growing up, I got to see my dad about 4 months out of the year, right? I got to see him I would go down there for summer vacation. I'd stay with my dad in Southern California. He was a homicide detective, so he had a very, kind of a rough work schedule. It's not like you could just take off a couple of weeks and do stuff. But my dad did try to very much be there for important events. And again, I always say, this is another thing I try to tell kids too, is like, look, barring like significant abuse and things like that, you might want to try to give your parents a break, right? My dad didn't plan to become a father at 19. He did, right? And it was like, oh, holy crap, right? And so I get all of that, but I really felt like my dad stepped up in so many important ways and was very important in my life. My mom, incredibly, my mom's a saint, but my grandparents were so important to me. Spending time with both my mom's dad and my father's dad was just such a formative part of growing up for me, that they provided kind of that male guidance and wisdom and things of that nature. And it's one of the things we try to tell people too, is like, look, some guys that don't grow up with a dad, you're the one that gets to create that legacy for your own children. You're the one that gets to break the cycle and do something different that could set your family's whole future in a completely different trajectory and otherwise would have been had you not chosen to do that. But again, it's another reason why, that positive male role model, which should be the dad, but sometimes isn't, is so critical. We got a couple other things that I wanted to go through here on some of the statements on why dads are important and some of the larger reasons for why they're important. Go ahead and play the next one we got here.
Today is International Day of Play, and to celebrate this, a little short video about how important play is to dads and their kids, because dads are the parent when it comes to play, and in particular a form of play called rough and tumble play. That's the kind of play that's really exhilarating, really fast, really physical. You throw your kid in the air, tickle them, wrestle them, bounce on the sofa, and it's important to kids and their dads for two reasons. First of all, it really is an accelerated way of bonding with your child. Dads have to build their bonds through interaction. They don't get the head start of pregnancy, childbirth and breastfeeding. And rough and tumble play is a really time efficient way of doing that. Because it's so fast and because it's so physical, it's an amazing way of releasing a tidal wave of beta endorphin, oxytocin and dopamine for both dad and kid, forming a fast and firm bond. Secondly, it's important developmentally. Dads are the parent when it comes to scaffolding the child's entry into the world beyond the family. And one of the key things you have to learn to be able to do is social relationships. Rough and tumble play is the best way to do this because it teaches reciprocity. It teaches empathy as you try to read your play partner and make sure they're still having fun. It teaches the ability to have physical and mental resilience because rough and tumble play is risky and is challenging, and it teaches you to dust yourself off, pick yourself up when you think you might have failed a little bit. So when dads come to me after talks and say, what is the one thing I can do with my child? I answer, play with them, because play is
Pause there.
absolutely fundamental.
I thought that was
That's
really
so true.
It was really interesting too, because she's explaining kind of the science behind it. I think it's interesting how so much of this is intuitive. Like I would go, God made us this way, right? She's an anthropologist. She would say that this is part of evolutionary development. But it's interesting that this is kind of written into our coding to perform these different roles. It's another reason why, again, it's so important for a child to grow up with both mom and dad in the home. These are not just irreplaceable things. It's not just a paycheck. This is one of the things that I think has been so horrible about a lot of the ways that the government has intervened in the family, is that to the extent that they appreciate the father's contribution, they appreciate it almost solely from the standpoint of being able to provide money. And it's like, okay, well, if we just take the money out of this, well, now that we empower the woman, we empower the mother to not need that dad. It's like, whoa, first of all, meaningful relationships between men and women are the building block of society. Secondly, the children still need the dad, right? That's not going to be replaced by a government paycheck. It's not going to be replaced by a government program. It's not going to be replaced by a public school. It's not going to be replaced by, daycare. Those sorts of bonds and relationships that are built, and the specific roles that the dads feel inclined to play. I remember for me, doing the rough and tumble. Let me give an example. Tina somewhat gets upset with me when I give this example. So as Tina pointed out, I grew up oldest of 9 kids, right? There was, I think, 7 of us when I left the house. Yeah, no, there was 6 of us when I left the house to go off to the military, and then 3 more kids were born. One of them was born while I was on basic training. So I was just used to being around babies. I was used to being around kids. And I actually kind of also knew that they were a lot more resilient than they sometimes get credit for. Tina didn't grow up in that environment. She had younger siblings, but not ones that she interacted with quite as much as I ended up interacting with a lot of mine. So when we had Lily, when we had our firstborn, it was very, very tough. It was a difficult pregnancy. It was a very, very tough birth. Tina went through a lot on that. Lily and mom and baby ended up being fine, but it was tough, right? And Tina was just like very, very protective. And I remember the first time we were going out.
Oh man!
First time we were going
out. Oh, I know this story.
First time we were going out, and I got the stroller, and I'm walking, and Tina is just like, okay, do you have this? Do you have the blanket? Do you have this? I'm like, okay, yeah, I got it all. Which was good, because I can be a little bit like, okay, yeah, let's just go, let's do our thing, we'll figure it out. And Tina's more like, okay, no, do you have the things that we're going to need? She's an infant. Like, okay. So we're going there, and we walk into the store, and we're about to go upstairs, and she goes, what are you doing? So I'm carrying like the car thing. She goes, what are you doing? We're going up the escalator. You are not taking her up the escalator. Because I think she had seen a video or something like that of like a kid. It was a stroller.
I was working.
Oh, she saw it. Yeah.
I was working. Okay, this is back in the very beginning. Yeah. I was like 20. I was working at a clinique at Belk, and I watched somebody try to take their stroller down the escalator, and it went tumbling, and the baby was in it. And just seeing all the emergency crew, the baby's head's bleeding. I'm seeing all this stuff. And so then, of course, when you're getting on the escalator with my baby,
that's her baby. It's not our baby.
I end up with flashbacks of this baby bleeding from the head after taking a ride tumbling end over end down.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah, that was terrifying. And so that was in my mind, but I didn't articulate that. No. All I did was start crying because of the hormones.
She started crying and saying, like, we can't take her up the escalator. I'm like, babe, we're going up the escalator. Right? Like, so we get up there, and then we sit down, and we're having lunch, and Tina starts crying. And you got to understand, Tina's not a crier. Right? It's not that she never cries. It's not a regular thing. It's not a regular thing. So I'm not used to this. And Tina starts crying. I'm just eating my hamburger, right? Being a real, sensitive dad and husband at this point. And I'm like, baby, what is wrong? And she's like, I'm just afraid something's going to happen to her. I'm like,
no. I said it worse than that.
Yeah.
I said, I'm afraid that someday something bad might happen to her.
And of course, my response was, well, babe, of course something's going to happen to her.
Yeah,
I mean, like, things happen.
That was definitely the right thing to say.
That was definitely the way to go. That was, 23-year-old Nick really had a solid handle on that one. But again, part of this was from the earliest time, I can remember as soon as my kids were little and I could do anything with moving their legs or their hands or stuff like that. Like the dad is doing that. He's engaging. He's tossing him up in the air and watching as they giggle and whatnot, while the moms are all sitting there going like, oh my gosh, we're going to drop them. Like, don't do that.
Yeah, we're scared of them getting dropped. We're scared of them getting shaken baby syndrome when they're jumping and running around.
Yeah.
And, we just...
But again, it's that back and forth, right? Because if it's just the dad,
right,
then yeah, that kid's probably going to be, rolling around on a motorbike at age 3 and and if it's just the mom, they don't get to experience any of that. So that, again, that coming together is so critical for this. And it's nice to hear somebody actually go through the process of explaining that no, there's specific things that are done, that are developed, that have far-reaching consequences. One of them is about that social interaction, about that play. Jordan Peterson actually talks about this as well when he talks about how play between someone that's older and someone that's, a father and a son, or a father and a daughter. One of the important things that actually teaches people about relationships is when I interact with you and I play with you, obviously I'm stronger than you, right? Hopefully I'm stronger and smarter than my 3-year-old. Right. But if you just dominate the 3-year-old, they don't want to play because it's no fun. So what do? You back up and you do it, and you don't let them win all the time, because then you create a little brat, right? You let them win sometimes, and you do it, and they get the feeling of like challenging and overpowering and sometimes not winning and all of that. What is it? You're reciprocating. You're actually learning about nonverbal communication, verbal communication. All of that is built in. And like she said, because there's a heightened sense of, a little bit of danger in there, a little bit of challenge in there, right? Your body is reacting in various ways, and you're learning how to control and regulate and interact and do all of these things. So there's very defined reasons on why dad should be doing this.
We've got a lot of kids in our society now who don't have this. They haven't been taught this. Even if they come from 2-parent households, everything's been so feminized. Like the men have been told just to be so careful, and the women are in charge, and they're telling the men that you're not allowed to do this with the baby or with the child or whatever. And it's interesting. Like you had in your most recent video, Nick, that is the dad's video, there was some commentary. That's one of the reasons we're doing this video. Go ahead and scroll down, Christian, because Nick's over here waving at you, trying to get you to scroll down.
Sorry.
Okay, so there were comments in there that were saying, well, this whole "don't be a wuss" thing and "I don't care" thing, that's this is so toxic. Yeah. It's okay to be a femboy. That was one of them. And then another one was, look, Nick, this may work for some kids. This isn't going to work for all of the kids. There are some kids that, you would end up pushing them away in this situation, and it'll make them, they're not suited to this type of play or this type of behavior. And if you try to do that with them, it's not going to work, and blah, blah, blah. What I have to say to the people that are saying that is, I think you misunderstand. First of all, the femboy thing, that's not a thing. Sorry, go pound sand. Here's the other thing. Like, femboys, give me a break. Let's have a war and see how many femboys make it. So here's the deal. I'm just saying,
not a lot of them in Ukraine and Russia right now, right?
A good barbarian invasion will solve a lot of these issues. I'm just saying, they'll weed them out real fast. Survival of the fittest, right? I'm kidding. So some of these people,
I don't think
though,
she is kidding.
Okay, I'm not. You're right. I'm not. Some of these things, though, I think the people that are more reasonable coming in saying, not every kid responds to this stuff the same way. I think what you misunderstand is Nick's not advocating that you be super hard on the kid right off the bat or what. You have to, over time, spend the time easing them into play. Like, it's got to be stuff that, like, the kid does respond to. And I think this idea that, some kids are just so highly technical that they want to sit in front of a screen their whole life and like, do whatever, and they're just so intellectual. I'm sorry, you failed in this other area and you're coping now. Like, all I saw was cope. I'm like, okay, you've got a weak kid, you created a weak kid, and you're like, oh, he's just not that way. No, You trained him to be how he is. Your kid doesn't raise themselves. You raise them. And if your kid's still a brat at this stage, or if your kid is still struggling at this stage, or they're a total wuss, you need to go look in the mirror and go, what did I do that made this happen? Because kids don't suddenly become this way on their own. You failed somewhere and you're going to have to fix it. And I'm so sick of people coming in and doing cope and just, oh, well, not all kids. It's like, no, you're right. Not all kids, because you hardwired him this way.
I knew when I did that video, because I did the first video on things that daughters need to hear from their fathers. And obviously it was a more sensitive take on that. And then I did one on things that sons need to hear from their dads. And the first 3 things they needed to hear was, don't be a wuss. No, seriously, don't be a wuss, and be a man, right? Like, and I knew what that was going to do. I knew what that was going to generate. And I figured, look, either people are going to take the time to understand where I'm coming from, because I've talked about this so much, right? I've talked about this so much. I've made so many caveats. I've made so many, comprehensive explanations about what I mean by different things. But the bottom line is that people get tired of watching stuff where it's just caveat after caveat after caveat. So I said, look, I have a great relationship with my son, right? I'm not just his father. I consider him to be a close friend, because he's 18 now. The reason why I consider him to be a friend now is because I enjoy being around him, right? I'm just around him out of obligation of being his father. I enjoy being around my son. But part of that had to be telling your son to suck it up, move on, do your thing. If you would have watched to the other parts of that video that I talk about, it's really important that you spend time with your son. It's really important that you include your son on projects that you do. It's really important that you tell your son that you love him, that you verbalize that you love your son. It's very important that you tell your son that you're proud of him, but that you can't, telling your son you're proud of him when you're not proud of something, or telling him that you're proud of him that when he did something that you're not actually proud of, is a lie, which means that, hey, dads, you got to spend time. You got to give them projects. You got to help them develop challenges so they can do things that you truly respect, because men need respect, but you can't give it. I can give you love. I can't give you respect. My job as a dad is to put you in situations where you can develop those capabilities to earn respect, so that when dad says, I'm proud of you, or when dad says, good job, it means something. And they can identify between the genuine article and the fake. I went into all of that, but if you stopped at, oh, he just told his kid not to be a wuss, another toxic male. Okay, great, good. Comment and move out, because quite frankly, the world, a lot of men today have been raised by the sort of people that just want to say that, oh, no, not everyone's that way. Not everyone. Shove it. I'm so tired of it.
Well, some people came in and
death
said,
by 1,000 caveats is what I mean. Far be it me to bash caveats, right? But you're totally right that we are living through death by 1,000 exceptions.
We are
using the exceptions in order to dismantle things that every generation until the previous one knew. Oh yeah, this is how the world works, and this is how society needs to be organized because it works this way. We have 2,000 plus years of, civilization. We have, 4,000 or 5,000 years of civilization to build upon, that we've tried and tested certain things and we've learned them to be true. And now it's like in the last 60 years, we've decided to throw out 5,000 years of what worked in favor of what sounds good, to quote Thomas Sowell. And then we're sitting here wondering why we have a mental illness crisis. We're sitting here wondering why we have, huge antisocial problems, why we have people's inability to interact with each other, why the family structure is breaking down. Well, the reason why is because we chucked out what worked. It gets back to the point that was being made at the very start of this segment, that we're having to relearn things that everybody took for granted as just being true. We're having to use studies in evolutionary biology and stuff like that to reaffirm stuff that, again, every generation until the previous one just knew were the truth.
Yeah, they're saying that Nick was, one of the comments said that Nick was living in the 1950s. Well, I hope you have fun living in the 1950s. Yeah. And it's like, but you know what?
Yeah.
We had a lot of men come out of the 1950s, whereas now we've got femboys.
I've gotten to the point where I don't care. If you don't like it, go ahead and move along. And the reason why I don't care is because I've seen it. It's worked. That's one of the biggest things that I would like to tell people about all of this is stop living your life based exclusively on what the latest expert out of the anthropology or sociology department at Cal Berkeley said. You can use stats, you can use figures, you can use peer-reviewed studies and everything else to manipulate all kinds of things. But the bottom line is we all kind of intuitively know certain things. Now, your intuition's not always right, and sometimes traditions are wrong. But I'm so tired of us throwing out thousands of years of something that has been beneficial. Well, a new study said this, when in reality what it is culture is engaging in its latest version of COPE.
Yep.
They found the right university professors to give them the stats and the studies they want to try to elevate that COPE to, scientific rigor. And then now we're just supposed to ignore everything. We're supposed to ignore observable reality because the experts said so. And it's amazing how I will see people that, their first response to anything that you say is source or you're not an expert in this field. Like, gosh, I feel really sorry for the people that honestly have to go through life reading a peer-reviewed study before they can get an opinion on anything because they've done so little in their life that they have no actual experience to actually go off of. We got some super chats here we want to go to. Nayeb, I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Nayeb, thank you very much for the super chat. Said, hi, I wanted to ask you what you thought about the biblical view of honor your parents. I recently became a Christian who's from a Muslim family, had to cut contact out of fear for my life. How do I reconcile with this? First of all, that's a great question. And once again, welcome to the faith. Listen, the biblical mandate to respect and honor one's parents does not mean that you have to do so at your physical peril or emotional abuse. It does not mean you have to submit yourself to abuse. The honoring is the concept of, to the extent that is within your power, you live at peace with people. You don't attempt to, denigrate or disparage your parents. You try to accept whatever wisdom that you can from them. You show genuine appreciation for the fact that they, bore you or perhaps raised you or whatever it is. But ultimately, they're not the ultimate authority in your life, right? That's God. And so you don't have to put yourself in, again, an emotional or physical peril in order to maintain that relationship. You can honor your parents while at the same time putting up the appropriate boundaries between you and them. And you're dealing with boundaries that most of us don't even have to imagine, right? I've seen people before where maybe the father-in-law or maybe the mother-in-law or whatever it was constantly trying to interfere in the life of their child after that child got married. Right. And there's boundaries that have to go up, which say, look, if you're not willing to respect the new dynamic, then there's going to be appropriate limitations on access. That's not dishonoring to one's parents. So I think that's the distinction that you have to make is honor is saying that I will show due deference and respect to my parents, because that's not only beneficial for them, it's beneficial for you. And this is true of a lot of things in life, but when we talk about that commandment within Scripture, it says it's the first one that comes with the promise. So I would say certainly maintain that level of respect and honor, but it is not a violation of Christian doctrine or your faith or reasonableness to set up appropriate boundaries in order to protect for your physical and emotional safety. I hope that answers that question. Mike H. said, don't take e-bike batteries onto elevators or it could ignite and turn you into Anakin Skywalker combat vet. Good to know. And then Caleb Knight said, I just got here, saw the title, more than ever. The title is Are Fathers Really Important Anymore? And yeah, I would agree that fathers are incredibly important, and we're learning why. We're going to go and talk to another thing here, and then we're going to get into another aspect of why we actually have this problem. This one, there's 4 reasons. This was actually on Fox 26. I thought it was interesting. 4 reasons on why fathers specifically are important. And I read through this, I was like, wow, there's a lot in here that I really like. Dads set the bar of comparison for other relationships. The way a father treats his child powerfully influences the characteristics that the child seeks in other relationships. This awareness begins at birth as the child observes how dad treats their mother. I've talked about this so much. I've gone on a lot of dad podcasts and things like that where they will ask about, hey, how do you raise sons and daughters and how do you do this? I said, look, one of the first things that your kids actually observe is how you treat their mother, how you treat your wife, because you're teaching you're developing expectations for their future relationships on what they see both the marriage dynamic as and the family dynamic as. And it has to start with that love, dignity, honor, and respect that you pay to your wife. And that should obviously be reciprocated to you too, as the husband and father. Your sons are learning how to treat and behave toward a woman, how to protect, how to provide, how to honor, how to engage. Your daughters are also developing expectations for what they should see one day in their husband. When they make that joke that daughters marry their dads, right? They marry someone like their dads. That's kind of a crude way to describe it. I would say is that your daughter is establishing in her own mind expectations for what healthy relationships look like. And if she grew up in an environment where there was abuse or there was yelling or there was screaming all the time or there was uncertainty or insecurity, she's not going to see that as abnormal when a man demonstrates that in a dating relationship. She's not going to see that as abnormal behavior, even though it can be incredibly dangerous. And this is so important for daughters and the role that fathers play with specifically their daughters is if you have fostered that good, healthy relationship with your daughter, but then she also sees that good, healthy relationship and love and admiration with the wife, with her mother, that's what she's going to be looking for. She's going to be looking for similar attributes, but most importantly, you are setting expectations. So the moment that boy does something that he shouldn't be doing, the moment he's too physical, the moment he is, verbally abusive, the moment he says things or does things, it's going to send up the red flag in her mind of this is not the way a man is supposed to treat a woman. I know this because my dad would never do that to my mom, never say that to my mom, never treat my mom that way. So this is very, very critical. 2, dads influence their daughters' perspective of men. I kind of got a little bit ahead of myself. I kind of already explained that, so it is. But this is really important, right? The dad is not just supposed to be strong. The dad is also supposed to be loving. The dad is supposed to be able to show a tenderness toward his daughters that the rest of the world doesn't get. Right? I talk about this a lot. I don't like the term vulnerability. I just always, and maybe that's my own little catch up. But Tina one day said, "Well, Dad," or she said, "Honey, it's not that the kids need to be vulnerable. They do need you to be tender. They do need to see a soft side of you that is for them." And that's for both your girls and your boy. And your boy also needs to be able to know that hey, you got his back and whatnot. 3, dads shape their son's character. From an early age, sons model themselves after their father's character and seek his approval. A son learns how to be a man based on observations of his father's words and actions. The lasting impression of a disengaged father can lead to feelings of inadequacy and a sense of being lost, often compelling a son to seek other male role models. No one can replace the character building function that a caring and respectful dad provides to his son.
Can I chime in on this one?
Yeah.
This one is really important to me. There may be women that don't necessarily love the character of the guy that they chose, but and so maybe it doesn't apply in that situation. And I'd say you got to choose better and maybe dig into why you did choose somebody that didn't have good character. But in my situation, I have a husband with the best kind of character. He's very honorable. He doesn't. I remember even in high school, he would not lie. And I remember him just having nothing to do with people who would lie. It just made him so mad. And he felt like it was such a huge character flaw. When Luke was little, of course, every little boy wants to be like his dad if he's got a good dad. And Luke was having some issues telling the truth. And they were little ones, right?
He was little.
It was little stuff. But he was lying to me. And Nick was in Iraq. It was really hard for Nick to be able to deal with it. He's traveling a lot. And so I'm the one who had to deal with this. But this is probably, I would say, some good advice for the mom because what I did worked. He kept lying. We were having issues with it. I tried a few different other things to get him to stop. And he wasn't stopping. And I sat him down finally and I said, "Do you want to be like Daddy when you grow up?" And he's like, "Yes. Daddy's great. Do you want to be an honorable man like Daddy? Because in order to be like Daddy, you've got to be an honorable man. Do you want to be an honorable man?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "How do you think you get to that point where you are an honorable man? You don't just suddenly wake up one day as a man and go, all right, I'm an honorable man. I chose it as an adult. That's what I am." No, it is going to be a series of choices that you make, little tiny choices throughout your life, starting as a little boy and going on up, little choices that you make, whether it's the honorable decision or the dishonorable decision. And the more you make the honorable decision, you will find one day that you have earned and become that honorable man, just like daddy. And I am telling you, at that point, it's like he dropped the lying and he became a truth speaker. And that it was my ability to use daddy's character in order to package a message that would help him understand why it's so important to be honest, even if it's about, did you take the cookie out of the drawer? You know, whatever it is, it's little things like tell me the truth. Telling me the truth is always going to be better than telling me a lie. And you may still get in trouble, but it won't be as bad as if you lie and I found out you lied. And so, having an honorable man in the household is so incredibly helpful for a child to model after, and mom is able to help guide and go, hey, he didn't get this way overnight. He cared about this stuff for a really long time, and he made choices to get to where he is on this. And so you're going to, if you want to be like that, you have to make the choices too.
Yeah, I'm very happy. We have not had issues with our kids lying, even as teenagers and stuff like that. Especially every once in a while, you ask them a difficult question, you see their face just go, oh crap, because they're not going to lie to me. And I ask the question, like, did you do this? No. and there's been times where they could have gotten away with it. I wouldn't have known one way or the other. No, I forgot, or I didn't do that. And yeah, it's good. But again, on the other side of that is when your kid tells you the truth on something that they know is going to result in punishment for them or censure or whatever it is, you do have to actually reward on the other side of that and say, look, you did the honorable thing. You told the truth. I appreciate that. There has to be consequences for your actions because that doesn't go away in the real world, even when you tell the truth. But there's a respect there in telling the truth, even when you knew it was going to hurt you. And again, that respect is important for both boys and girls. The fourth one is dads instill self-sufficiency in their children. Christian, can you scroll? Dads instill self-sufficiency in their children. In many families, dads emphasize independence and exploration of the outside world, while moms focus more on nurturing. Both roles are critical for the health and well-being of the child. Kids who grow up with an involved dad exhibit greater confidence in exploration, increased capacity for managing their emotions, and a greater likelihood of participating in pro-social activities. You know, it's interesting. One of the things that they talk about, we did a whole episode on mental disorders, and we talked about the idea of antisocial behavior and how there's a very strong link. Antisocial behavior is considered, you know, when you look at everything as bad as serial killers to murderers and the whole deal, it's that antisocial component. And again, developing those social skills are critical early on. And the father does play an incredibly important role, both from identifying what that looks like, but also regulating, especially in young men, some of that impulsive desire to either use strength or physicality to get what you want, as opposed to using it for, you know, again, good and noble purposes. Last thing I kind of want to go to here is I want to talk a little bit, if you go into, you know, why is there a fatherhood crisis? So why do we have a situation? We've already talked a little bit about this. We've talked about some of the ideologies which have influenced higher education, arts and entertainment, the denigrating of the father, the replacement of the father with the state, the natural animosity that a lot of left-wing ideology. And again, if you're on the left and you think, wait a second, I love my family. We're not saying that everybody on the left or everybody that identifies as liberal has a problem with the family. Many do not. But leftist ideology, especially that which is rooted in critical theory, Marxism, etc., is very, very hostile toward what we would consider to be the traditional family, mother, father, children, right? So that's what we mean by that. All of that has had a heavy influence, but there's some other things too that show up a lot. And there's a lot of people that have a real problem with the manosphere, what we call the red pill males or things like that. And here's what I would say. I oftentimes don't agree with some of their analysis. I certainly don't agree with some of the solutions, but you will get an idea of what a lot of men are identifying as the problem. The reason why so many of these guys have such a great influence with young men is because they're addressing problems that a lot of people, especially left-wing social media, wants to constantly denigrate or mock. Like, oh, poor men, oh, cry about it. Well, these guys are talking about it and it's resonating. It's one of the reasons why you see this massive departure between young men and young women in the way that they interpret the world and the way that they're actually, you know, arriving at what the potential solutions could be. So let's look at this first one.
The family courts, where women are initiating 80% of the divorces, 90% of alimony is paid for men to women. Women win almost all the child custody battles, okay? And people might sit there, well, the men don't fight for the kids. The reason why they don't fight for the kids is because their lawyers tell them not to waste their money. and time, because they're gonna lose. Because a lot of people say, oh, well, Myron, the men don't even fight for the kids, that's why the women get the kids automatically. No, a lot of the times when guys retain counsel, the counsel tells them straight up, bro, you're not gonna get them. The only way that you're gonna get custody of your kids in today's day and age is the woman got to be damn near pathetic and homeless.
Krishan Rock
Yeah.
level type stuff.
And she still got the kid.
Yeah, which is scary, by the way.
Pause. So I will tell you right now, every time I bring this up, I usually have women will come up in the chat and be like, oh, this is ridiculous, or, oh, I am telling you right now, I've dealt with a lot of guys. I've dealt with a lot of custody issues by being a state representative. I get people calling me up. And again, this is not something as a state rep I typically deal with, except with respect to legislation, but I have tried to help people before identify, resources that they can utilize and whatnot. And I have to tell you, the custody stuff is horrible. It is the worst, because you're trying to help somebody, but you can't possibly know all sides of the story. You can't possibly know all the ins or outs. And in most cases, men are on the losing end when it comes to the court case. So there are certain assumptions which are baked into our legal system. And not to mention the fact, and this gets brought up a lot, I don't think we have a clip for it, but this gets brought up a lot. It's when people like Pearl Davis, who's a woman, right, is talking about how marriage does not favor men. Marriage puts men at an economic disadvantage or a social disadvantage. When you see people like Andrew Tate talk about this, when you see people like Justin Waller talk about this, right, these guys are heavily influential. And they say things I agree with. Not everything, but they say things I agree with. One of the things they point out is like, okay, so if a man gets married, so let me get this straight. If a man stays single, he's living in an environment where, especially if he's a higher producing man, because that's usually what they're talking about. They're talking about the top 30% of males. If he's a higher producing man, if he's a successful man, he can sleep with as many women as he wants. He can sleep with as many women as he wants. And he has a kid, yeah, he might have to take care of him. But the moment he gets married, the moment he exclusively invests in that one woman, that one relationship, if she decides to leave, she will almost automatically, from a legal perspective, get to take half and the kids. And he will lose half of what he has, and he will have to fight massive legal battles in order to get either custody or even to be able to have a reasonable access to his children that doesn't just include weekends and holidays and things of that nature. So why would he do it? Now, again, the answer that I give is because that's the proper way to actually raise children. And what you do is you find a woman that you can actually build a relationship with, right? I have never once had to worry if my wife was going to leave me and take the kids. A large part of that is because of her character. Some of it is also because of my character and what I'm looking for. So I don't think, I will say this, I think it is a cop-out for men to just throw marriage out, but I also think it's important to understand that a lot of men are looking at this from the perspective of, wait a second, you mean legally she can take everything? Man, I better really trust her. Yeah, you better really trust her. You better really love her. You better really be able to really depend on all of those values and character attributes that we always tell people to look at first. It's also the reason why you don't go sleeping around with people.
Exactly. You have to keep yourself clear-headed enough to be able to see all the red flags. I've seen so many guys date women that were so freaking crazy and they thought, oh yeah, this is the one. And it's like, dude, you picked a crazy woman and the red flags were there. You were just oblivious because you weren't thinking with the correct brain. And that's it. Like, a lot of times it's all this physical contact beforehand, and whatever gratifies the sexual urges is what's making people choose who to live their life with. And I'm sorry, but that stuff that is not a good way to make decisions. You know how sometimes women will make really emotional decisions and they're usually not good decisions? Well, men will make, I don't know, decisions based on what arouses them. And those are terrible decisions usually. And so I just feel like so much of this would be solved by saving the sex for marriage.
Yeah.
I'm just going to put it there.
We've talked about this before because, again, obviously, look, men are very driven by the physical. We're very driven by physical beauty. We're very driven by, sex. It's just a reality, right? Men tend to have a higher desire for that than women do on the average. The problem is that if men allow themselves to be motivated by that, then what ends up happening is the quicker you get physical in a relationship, the more likely you are willing to overlook red flags in a relationship. So instead of first meeting someone and appreciating them for their values, then their interests, and then life goals and everything else. The physical starts very, very early in the relationship. And that's, I honestly believe it's the easiest part to figure out, right? In a relationship is the physical.
You got all these people that want to be like, you don't want to, you got to test drive the car before you buy it, man. It's like, I'm sorry, but sex is so easy to figure out, you guys. Like, we're pretty freaking good at it. and you get good at it with each other and you learn together. You do not need to, it's like, oh, well, I have certain kinks that maybe she's not going to be into. Well, I'm sorry, then you don't deserve the woman.
Yeah.
You don't deserve the woman that you want outside the bedroom if you're trying to get somebody who's willing to do a bunch of weird kinks with you.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sorry.
Well, and this is another area where porn has become just such a huge problem for both men and women.
There's a reason they call it a kink.
Yeah.
It's because it's not, some of this stuff isn't normal.
Yeah.
And maybe you need to dig in and figure out why you want to do something that's not normal.
Yeah. So Kelev Knight, thank you for the super chat, said the existence of that fear is proof that the system is broken. I will say this. I don't always think the existence of fear is proof that something is broken, but in this case, I think it is. I think it's I think the fear is very tangible. I think that fear primarily impacts people that don't take marriage quite as seriously as they probably should. But that doesn't mean it's exclusive to them. And it doesn't mean that there isn't something fundamentally wrong or mistaken that's going on within our legal codes. I think back when you didn't have just like very easy, no fault divorce and everything with, and you had a certain moral standard and certain social expectations around getting married, staying married, and all of these other things. This didn't factor in as much. And when divorce did take place, it was fairly rare. And so you weren't dealing with as many episodes of this. Now that it's become more common, now that we've kind of desanctified marriage and turned it into just kind of a temporary contract if it happens to work for you, then most men have come to the conclusion that, or I should say most men, a lot of men have come to the conclusion that this isn't worth it. This is a legal liability. And that's another one of those areas that happens when you are trying to rectify a social problem in law without understanding that there's an underlying moral component to what's going on. There's an underlying social component that has to be solved by people engaging in self-regulation of their own attitudes, behaviors, and practices. When you think you can just solve it through a law, you end up with these sorts of problems. Let's go ahead and there's another clip I wanted to go. Let's go to the next one, Christian, if we can hit that one up. All right, this is another one this is Pearl Davis. She's talked a lot about this stuff. Again, people got a lot of different ideas about Pearl.
We don't all agree on everything she says, but she does say some pretty decent points.
Look, the bottom line is that part of the problem is that people want to completely shove all these people into a particular category and completely ignore everything that they're saying when they don't realize that, look, maybe you don't agree with their solutions to everything. Maybe you don't agree with the way that they articulate every single problem. But I've watched a lot of this stuff, and quite frankly, they're bringing up valid points. And ignoring the valid points or just treating them like they're not worthy of consideration as opposed to actually effectively engaging, I don't think is the answer. So let's go and see this one.
Because the court system favors them.
No, but okay.
And I'll tell you what.
Go on.
And men are punished for being traditional in this country. They are, because the way the court system and see this, I'm gonna talk about this because I know things. The code is written. It's basically the person that spends the most time with the child. Yeah. Well, if a man wants to protect and provide for his family, who does that punish? The guy for doing the right thing.
Pause.
But the children spend more.
So again, this part of this understanding of the way the legal codes have developed the way they did has to do with this idea that, okay, the mother's the nurturer, the father's the provider. Well, if you isolate the relationship to nothing more than mom raises, father provides for, well, then you can remove the father from the relationship and say, well, as long as they're providing, they're fulfilling the fundamental role that they play within that relationship. No, that's wrong. That is a misunderstanding of the important and vital role that a father plays within the emotional, intellectual, and physical development of their children. You are treating them. No wonder you have a society that treats a father like they can be replaced by a paycheck either from the father in the form of child support or by a government check if the only thing that you think the father does is go to work and pay bills.
The other thing to point out is a lot of times in single parent relationships or with their children, that I have seen firsthand well, I guess secondhand, but within my family, I watched certain marriages completely fall apart, and you saw the mother completely sort of damage the father in the eyes of the children because of her own hurt. He was a wonderful father, but the kids were not allowed to love their dad. They weren't allowed to still want to spend time with their dad. The mom tried so hard to turn the kids against the dad, even though the reason the marriage fell apart had absolutely nothing to do with how good of a father he was. And I watched this happen. And then on the other side, now the kids don't speak to the mom because the kids have realized that the mom was the crazy one, right? This is one of the things that I found really interesting in the way that Nick was raised. Is Nick's mom never badmouthed his dad, and she always made sure that he viewed his dad as his hero, and she never tried to rip him down from that. And that takes a lot as a mom when you've got your own hurt. Marriages fall apart and it hurts, even if it's it could be the most amicable thing in the world, and it still hurts. There's still a lot of big feelings, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering that goes in on the husband-wife side of it.
Yeah.
And having the ability to take a step back and not let that filter down to your kids and not let that taint your children, that is a service that a mother can do to her kid for her kids that is just the best thing you can do. Like, this is what Robin did. And so anybody who's got, issues with a former spouse or former partner of some sort, and you've got kids with that person, the best thing you can do for those kids is let the kids find out the character of the person for themselves, because they may have a completely different situation than you do with that person. And obviously, if there's abuse involved, okay, protect your kids.
Yeah.
But like, let's say that this person cheated on you or whatever, and you don't need to make that the kids' problem. The kids still have a father, right? Or they still have a mother. You don't have to totally destroy that person in the eyes of that child. You'll end up being the one to pay for that if you do.
Let's go. Actually, this is a clip from a video, and it was really powerful. I think the show's called New Amsterdam or something like that. But I want to play this clip because it actually goes right to the point of what Tina's talking about.
How dare you speak to me like that?
You're a liar.
How dare you speak to me like that?
He didn't walk out the door. You drove him away, I remember. Mum, please, just stop. I remember him begging to stay. I remember him holding me. And I remember you ripping me out of his hands while you screamed at him to get out. And then you spent the next 30 years telling me that he abandoned us, that he's a racist, that he didn't love me. That lie shaped my entire future, my feelings towards kids, towards men. He called me on his deathbed, and I hung up on him. I will never have even an idea of a father because of you. So the next time you want to talk about Baba, I would love for you to try something. Just try something at which you have very little practice. Shut up.
Dang.
Back when writing was apparently good.
Yeah. Well, what I think is interesting about that is that obviously there's mothers that have to get their children out of bad situations because of abusive fathers. There's no question. No
and
question.
You should.
And you should.
Don't stay somewhere where you're being abused.
No, guaranteed. This is just the other side of this. This is the other side of this where, and sometimes there are situations where a man has not been the best husband, right? Has not been the best husband.
Yep.
That doesn't mean that they're guaranteed to be a bad father. It doesn't mean that they can't mature. It doesn't mean that their children don't still need them. And what the problem that happens sometimes, and again, I'm very grateful because my mom didn't do this. She did not let the problems between her and my father become the problems between her children and their father. She didn't let the problems between her and her husband become the problems between me and my father. And the end result is that, one, they have a good relationship. And I have a good relationship with both of them. I actually have an immense amount of respect for both of my parents. And by the way, I want to mention something too. I remember when my mom and stepdad were getting divorced. My mom and stepdad were getting divorced. And my stepdad wanted to talk to my dad because he still wanted to be involved in our lives. And quite frankly, I didn't really want him to be. And it's not because he was like abusive toward us or anything like that. If he wasn't married to my mom, I wasn't interested. I'll put it that way. And even then I wasn't very interested. But he sat down with my dad, and my dad heard him out. And one of the things he said, he goes, well, I think Robin's turning the kids against me. She wasn't. She wasn't. She wasn't. But I remember my dad told me later, and I found out about this later. He looked at Bruce and said, well, if she chooses to do that, she's their mother. You're not their father. She goes, but I will tell you this much. What's not going to happen is you coming between Robin and the boys. That's not going to happen. Right. So here's my dad talking to my stepdad, who he'd known for 5 years.
Defending his
ex-wife. Making
ex-wife.
it very, very clear that he's defending his ex-wife and making sure that he understands that he's going to have her back with respect to the dissolution of the marriage and with respect to what goes on here. So it's important. It's important, I think, for people to understand, if you are in a situation where there was divorce, or maybe there is about to be divorce, or whatever it is, just because two people weren't able to, whatever it is, I don't want to make excuses because I think divorce is horrible, but sometimes it is better than the alternative. I will put it that way. There are biblical reasons why it can be better than the alternative. That doesn't mean that person can't be a good parent, right? Failure in one area is not failure in all areas. And you have to distinguish, because there are times where, again, if we're talking about a lot of physical and emotional abuse, then yes, separation, isolation from that, it might be the appropriate answer. But you need to sometimes be able to look at and again, I know I'm just speaking about this from the perspective of the child in this case, not from the perspective of the person that had to go through it. You may have to look at the own hurt and animosity and frustration, maybe justifiable hurt, animosity, and frustration that you have for that other person, and not transfer it to your kids. Because they still need both of you. They still need both of you. And to the extent that you can still give them both of you, you can have a very, very different,
that doesn't necessarily mean that you hide things from the kids. I will say we had a situation when I was little. My dad came to pick us up because it was his weekend, but he was drunk, and he had driven there completely drunk. And my mom made him sleep it off in the truck before he could take us. He literally just slept out in the driveway in his truck before she would let him take us. Now, I think you, as a kid, you see that for yourself. There are certain things there where don't make excuses, don't hide necessarily try to hide things, but I think that it's important to protect your kids if there is a dangerous situation, which that would have been a dangerous situation, and I'm glad that my mom did that. And like I said before, my dad did finally conquer the alcoholism, but it was a while.
No, it is an incredible thing. It is an incredible thing too to watch somebody have a period of life where they struggle with something and it causes damage, right? But then to really build back from that and to seek reconciliation, right, and to not make excuses for what happened, but to seek reconciliation and then watch a relationship develop from that. And I think it's pretty incredible. All right, we're going to end on something of a happy note here, because we're talking about some tough issues and things that are really affecting our society. And this is something that I think, unfortunately, we look at some of our episodes, which are kind of time sensitive. We're going to be talking about the riots in the UK on Thursday. Episodes like this, are kind of relevant throughout. Right?
They're unfortunately quite timeless.
Yeah. So, all right, let's look at these. I got some other clips here that I want to go through because I think these just crack me up. But go ahead and click on this next one here. I love this. 6 years ago, my father taught me MMA step by step, and she's tiny. I think she's probably she's gotta be 4 maybe in this. One of the things I love about this.
That's actually kind of cool.
It really is. I do MMA with my son, and I'm watching him develop and get better and better at it. I talked a while back. I did a joke about how someone was, I had somebody ask me you talk about these moments where you get choked up with your little girls. Do you ever get choked up with your son? I said, oh yeah, the other day. he landed a rear naked choke while we were doing MMA, and he had that thing so good, like my head was like popping. I was about to black out, and the only way I was able to get out of it is I managed to get up on one knee and slam him down enough to, choked up. Oh, I thought you said choked out. Yeah, no, it's my son choking out. That's our father-son bonding moment. But it was great. It is good. But it's also important with your girls too. My daughter, she took a couple of boxing classes. She didn't do it a lot, but she enjoyed kind of the exercise and the workout. Mm-hmm. And I do think it's good for girls to learn how to fight. All right, let's watch this next one.
Raj, who's home? Dada.
He's running around. He's going down the stairs.
Scoot down. Every kid figures out the stairs.
Doing the baby scoot down the stairs.
Get him. Who is it?
Dada.
I got to tell you too, as a dad, when you come home and you open that door and your little kids are like, Daddy, and they want to come in and they want to run and they want to jump on you and they want to, that is like, they have all these jokes about men only want one thing and it's disgusting. Don't get me wrong, we do want that thing, but coming home and your kids being excited to see you, your wife being excited to see you. I got to tell you right now, there's not too many things that I've had to deal with, to include combat that are not solved, that can't be solved with walking through the door to a wife and kids that are happy to see you. It's like, I'll crawl through broken glass for that. It's incredible. I loved this too. Jason Kelsey, when he was retiring from the Philadelphia Eagles, obviously there's been kind of a different paths for him and his brother, who are both incredibly talented football players. But I just play this because this this really impressed me.
Things a person can be in this world is a father. A father who is present, loving, devoted just may be the greatest gift a child could ask for in our society. And I have a damn good one. My father believed in me more than anyone. He believed in my brother. And whenever my own insecurities would arise or self-doubt would come in, he would stifle them with the warm embrace of belief, unwavering love and belief. My father worked in the steel industry in Cleveland for the majority of his life. I remember him taking me into a plant one time and standing in awe of the molten steel and watching a giant ladle containing a bunch of it hover over our heads just feet away. The heat radiated when the molten steel was in sight. And I remember thinking how utterly amazing my father's work was. He was the man and continues to be the man and father I strive to be.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's another thing too. You want yeah. I mean, we need more guys. We need more guys like that where like that guy's a man's man, right? Like, star football player, the whole deal. Great player.
Dads
aggressive.
anchor the family. They are the anchor for the family. They hold them in stability, and that's the function. Like my stepdad, he's the one that played that function. When my dad wouldn't show up, when he wouldn't call,
Yeah.
Like every time my real dad broke my heart.
Yeah.
My stepdad was there to put the pieces together. And so to me, having a dad can just make and break. It could make or break you. And for those stepdads that step in and they help change the trajectory of a child's life, that can mean all the difference in the world. And I just, you look at some of these dads and some of these grandfathers who are kind of the patriarchs of the family. And sometimes when a grandfather passes away, it's like suddenly the family is rudderless. And it's like they're adrift now, and there's no one new anchoring the family. And I feel like a good father can then be that good grandfather to help and stay engaged and anchor the family. And I feel like we're on our way to that. I wish more people were, because that can have such a massive impact. But I just want to encourage the guys that maybe they're not your biological kids, but you can still make all the difference in the world. Take it from me. My stepdad did. Yeah. I would be a completely different person if I didn't have him. My mom and him got married when I was 4, and he has taught me everything I know how to do building wise and creatively. I learned from him, and like just that side by side time. Whether it was him buying cars that he was fixing up and us sanding our fingerprints off, sanding the Bondo and getting it to the point where he could flip it and then sell it as a nicer car. There were things like that, learning how to rebuild things, and just all that side-by-side time. I'm going to show you how to do something. Even one year he came for Christmas, him and my mom, and I'm not denigrating my mom. It's just this one is about dad, so I'm talking about dad. Even as a grandpa, Poppy, my kids call him Poppy, he brought like 2 or 3 different projects to do together with a family, as a family, at Christmas time, so that we did side-by-side time activities together. And a lot of these little things that we were making didn't turn out all that great, but we had so many laughs and we had so many good memories to make together. And I just like the encouragement I want to give is even if you're the dad, please be there. There's a lot of things a man has to conquer to be a good dad. I just encourage you to do it because it can make all the difference in the world. And if you're a stepdad, you can make all the difference in the world. Mine did. And I just want to encourage.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. We got a couple more here that I want to show. So let's do this one. And it's a video on Instagram, and it's when daddy works. It says when daddy works too much, but anyway.
What's wrong?
I need my new daddy.
Where's
She's
daddy?
got a picture of her dad.
I should look, but I need my new daddy.
Oh, this reminds me. Hit her pause. This reminds me when I was in Iraq, Tina would make like pictures and stuff like that. Like she'd make T-shirts. She'd make pillowcases for the kids with my picture on them and stuff like that, so they could hug daddy. And it made such a huge difference, not just for them. It made a big difference for me too when I came home, right? Because it's easy for kids in that situation to feel kind of abandoned by dad, right? If he's got to work a lot or if he's got to deploy overseas. And Tina played such an important role in making sure that I maintained that relationship with my kids, and that she kind of kept me alive for them when they were very little. And I had to be gone for like 9 months out of the year, right? That was a lot. All right, let's do this this is the last one. I think we got one more after this. No, this is the last one. This is the last one we're gonna do. Okay. Go ahead and click on this one. This is it's the father-daughter dance, not the one that I did, but father-daughter dance with the bride at the wedding. Go ahead and hit play. So they're dancing. And in the middle of them dancing, the bride takes off her shoes and stands on daddy's feet like she did when she was little. And that's how they did their daddy-daughter dance. Yeah. I gotta say, like, it was funny. I was speaking to a group the other day, and we were talking about a difficult topic, and I had to be one of the speakers for it. And about, 5 minutes into it, I said, I'm going to tell y'all something right now. I don't know what it is. Now that I'm in my 40s and my kids are getting kind of grown up and whatnot, I get more choked up than I ever did before. And so my grandpa warned me about this. My grandpa said, just wait. He goes, you're a tough guy, Nick, but when you start having kids, it becomes a whole lot harder. When you start having grandkids, it becomes even harder to kind of hold back the tears at times and to get choked up at times. And one of the things I want to say is, look, fathers need to be tough. Fathers need to be tough. We do. Our families need us to be. But it's true. I almost feel like one of the benefits you get of being a dad is that you get to that point where there's a certain tenderness that you get to show with your kids, and you get to show kind of on behalf of your kids and with your wife, as a result of all those memories that get built. from being able to be around them and watch them grow and then watch them start to establish themselves as adults and, marriage and now the teen era getting closer and closer to that day when we'll be grandparents. It's an exciting thing. And so I guess here's what I'd like everyone to kind of understand as we close out today. First of all, for anybody that didn't get to watch this live, it's going to be reposted at 5 p.m. Eastern on the video section of the podcast. You're still going to get to see it. You can jump ahead to all the parts you want.
Yeah, so if it was taken down, it wasn't YouTube taking it down.
Yeah,
that's just how we're processing it.
We're going to go through the live, shut it down, and then set it back up on the video section live because we want people to be able to jump around and go to the parts that they want. But here's the thing I want to close on. Fathers are important. And there's always going to be people with experiences, sometimes difficult ones, that maybe question that. There's going to be people with ideologies, political or otherwise, that want to challenge that want to essentially replace various institutions. And I think it's important to understand that the role that you play as a father is not just for your kids, it's also for you. And one of these days you look back and you understand, and in the moment you get it. You get how meaningful it is to show up, to work, to fight for the things that you believe in, to provide, to protect, and the sense of meaning and purpose that you get out of that as you're doing it is incredible. But what you start to understand, I think, a little bit farther down the road, and that's kind of where I'm at right now. My oldest daughter's 21, my son's 18 and about to head off, and my youngest daughter's 16. You start to realize that all of those moments that you had, as important as it was for them, it was also very important for you. I've said it before, there's things that I might be able to look at in life with a sense of accomplishment, certain professional goals that have been met, maybe certain important things that I got to be a part of, but none of it compares the importance of what it has meant to be able to be a husband and a father to my kids. And so many of the problems and the issues that we face as a country, that we face as a society, as communities, so much of those things, I think, are solved by dads showing up, and doing their job. Not always perfectly, but making the effort and recognizing how critical it is for your kids, for you, for future generations. And the best part about that news that I can give anybody is that, man, it is a joy. With all of the frustrations, challenges, difficulties at times, self-doubt that you go through, it is ultimately a joy. It is the sort of thing where every once in a while you get a moment to just sit there and look and reflect and to remember. And there's just nothing you would trade for it. So understand that the roles that parents play, both mothers and fathers, are critical. But to the men out there that are wondering if fatherhood is still as important as it has always been, the answer is yes. It is arguably just as critical now, in fact, more critical now because of the absence of it. And there's a lot of things within culture, society, and the law that is fighting against fathers right now. And what I'm going to tell you is that that's why we need you to fight back. That's why we need you to fight in spite of all of those things, to stand up and be that sort of man, to be that sort of husband, to be that sort of father, because that's ultimately what's going to change the conditions that led us to this point. So thank you very much for watching. We hope you found this valuable. And please continue to leave comments. We always appreciate it when people are able to come on and interact with us as we're doing the show. Like I said, it's going to be taken down briefly, but it'll be reposted at 5, so everyone will be able to still watch it. And if there's parts that you want to skip ahead to and take a look at, that's kind of why we're doing this. You'll be able to do all that then. So once again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.